My name is Alice. I'm 37 years old. That Tuesday afternoon, under a relentless Ohio downpour, I found myself frozen on my own front porch. The new brass lock felt like ice against my fingertips, stubbornly pushing my key back out. Through a crack in the blinds, I saw a stranger, some hired hand, ripping the sink out of my kitchen. I dialed my mother's number. She picked up immediately. Her voice was flat, devoid of warmth, almost surgical. "Oh, you're back from your trip early," she said. "Come over for dinner tonight. I'll explain about selling the house." My mother and my parasitic sister had secretly sold the home I bought with 8 years of combat zone pay. They thought changing the locks meant they could strip a soldier of everything. But they had no idea. That house was never in my name. Tell me where you're listening to this story from. Hit like and subscribe if you've ever been bled dry by your own family. My life runs on a clock that doesn't care about feelings. 5 o'clock. The alarm on my phone is a sharp, tactical chirp. It's the only sound in my small, gray apartment before the radiator starts its morning clank. I don't do soft. I don't do snooze. I roll out of bed, the cold floor hitting my feet like a splash of lake water. My coffee is black, brewed from a cheap plastic pot that smells like burnt rubber. I drink it from a ceramic mug with a jagged chip on the rim. I could buy a new one. I could buy 10. But I don't. The chip is a reminder that things break, and you just keep using them until they're useless. I drive a 2015 Subaru Outback. It's dark blue, or at least it used to be before the Ohio salt and road grime dulled the finish. The passenger side has a deep, ugly gouge that runs from the front fender to the rear door. A hit and run in a grocery store parking lot 3 years ago. I never filed the claim. I never fixed the paint. As long as the engine purrs and the tires grip, the rest is just noise. Every cent I didn't spend on that car went into a high-yield savings account. That's how I bought my house. That's how I built my bunker. At the base, I'm a logistics captain. My day is spent in a windowless room lit by flickering fluorescents that make your skin look like curdled milk. I sit at a metal desk. The click-clack of my keyboard, the only rhythm in my life. I spend 8 hours a day hunting for errors. I look at defense contracts, shipping manifests, and supply chain reports. I look for the missing decimal point that cost the taxpayer $1 million. I look for the breach. My discipline isn't about pride, it's about fear. A deep, gnawing terror that if I let my guard down for 1 second, I'll end up like them. My sister, Denise, is a black hole disguised as a human being. She doesn't have a job, but she has a $600 a month gym membership and a leased luxury SUV that smells like vanilla and wasted potential. She's 33 and drowning in $214,000 of credit card debt. She buys designer bags to hide the fact that her bank account is a graveyard. My mother, Lorraine, is the architect of the disaster. She spends her days selling overpriced makeup to lonely women and her nights making excuses for Denise. "She's just going through a rough patch, Alice," she'd say. Her voice thick with that fake, saccharine sweetness she uses when she wants something. She just needs a little boost. Family helps family, right? In their world, I'm not a person. I'm a load-bearing wall. I'm the thing that holds up the roof while they set fire to the curtains. Nobody thanks the wall. Nobody asks the wall how its day was. They just expect it to stand there and take the weight until they need to hang a new picture on it. I bought my house 3 years ago. I didn't ask for help. I didn't want it. I put 20% down in cash, money earned from 3 deployments and 8 years of combat zone hazard pay. I spent my leave time alone, tearing up old carpet and slapping industrial gray paint on every wall. But I'm not stupid. I've lived with Lorraine and Denise long enough to know that blood isn't thicker than water. It's just more expensive. I didn't put my name on the deed. I used my training, OPSEC, Operations Security. I moved the property into a single-member LLC. To the county records, the house belongs to a nameless entity. To me, it was a suit of armor. I thought I was protecting myself from the government or a stray lawsuit. I didn't realize I was actually building a fortress against my own mother. Then came Gerald. He showed up in April, hovering around Lorraine like a vulture in a polyester polo shirt. He's 58, wears his hair in a slick back that's 10 years out of style, and reeks of a cologne that smells like industrial cleaner and bad intentions. We had dinner at my house once. He didn't compliment my cooking. He didn't even look at the food. He spent the whole night staring at my ceiling joists and tapping on my walls. "Solid foundation," he'd mutter, his eyes darting around the room like a barcode scanner. "What do the comps look like on this block? 220, 230? Is the title clear, or are you still paying the bank's interest?" His eyes were cold, calculating. He wasn't a guest. He was an appraiser. I felt the hair on my arms stand up. The tactical alarm in my brain was screaming, "Target identified." I wanted to kick him out right then. I wanted to change the locks, but I didn't have the time. I was shipping out for a TDY, temporary duty, in 48 hours. My bags were at the door. I was leaving the wire, and I was leaving my fortress unguarded. I looked at Gerald, then at my mother, and I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Ohio wind. "I'm leaving Friday," I said, my voice like a blade. "Don't touch my things." Gerald just smiled. It was a thin, oily stretch of skin that didn't reach his eyes. "Don't worry, Captain," he said. "We'll take care of everything." Bar Harbor in April is a graveyard of fog and salt air. I was there on a 10-day TDY, tucked away in a cramped office at the Coast Guard station, auditing fuel contracts that smelled like old grease and corruption. My mind should have been on the numbers. It should have been on the missing gallons in the logistics chain. But every time the wind rattled the window pane, I thought about the brass key I'd handed my mother back in Ohio. It was a split-second decision on my porch, a lapse in my own tactical judgment. I'd handed it to Lorraine with a simple instruction. "Water the ferns. Don't touch the thermostat." She'd smiled that soft, practiced smile, the one she uses right before she asks for a loan she never intends to pay back. I'd felt a prickle of unease, a small voice in the back of my head whispering about security breaches. But she was my mother. In the military, you trust the person next to you with your life because you have to. I thought home was the one place I didn't have to check for snipers. I was wrong. The enemy wasn't in a desert foxhole 3,000 miles away. The enemy was sitting in my living room, drinking my expensive coffee and eyeing my crown molding. The silence started on day 4. I'd sent a text asking if the mail had come. No reply. Day 5, I called twice, straight to voicemail. On day 8, the knots in my stomach turned into cold lead. I called Lorraine again at 2100. Ring, ring, voicemail. I tried Denise. She picked up after 4 hours with a text that read, "Mom's busy at Gerald's. Relax, Alice. You're always so wound up." I was standing on the pier in Maine, the Atlantic spray hitting my face like needles. Ruthie, my old sergeant, and the only person I trust with my real thoughts, was leaning against a rusted piling, nursing a lukewarm cup of gas station sludge. "She ain't answering?" Ruthie asked, her eyes fixed on the dark horizon. "Busy at Gerald's, apparently," I muttered, gripping my phone until my knuckles turned white. Ruthie spat into the water. "Alice, has your mother ever been too busy to make you feel like a disappointment? Silence from Lorraine Powell isn't a vacation. It's a maneuver. If she isn't talking, she's digging a hole. Question is, whose grave is it?" That was the alarm. The siren. I didn't wait for my orders to finish. I packed my sea bag in 12 minutes, military precision, and threw it into the back of the Subaru. I checked my oil, topped off the tank, and hit the I-95 south. I drove 14 hours straight. I didn't stop for food. I didn't stop for sleep. I fueled my body on caffeine and the raw, jagged edge of adrenaline. I watched the sun come up over the Pennsylvania hills and go back down as I crossed the Ohio border. My eyes were burning, my back was a sheet of fire, but I didn't slow down. I was a scout returning to a base that felt like it had already been overrun. I reached my street at 1647. The Ohio rain was a heavy gray curtain, blurring the outlines of the suburban houses I'd worked 8 years to escape. I pulled into my driveway, the gravel crunching under my tires like breaking bone. I didn't even turn off the engine. I hopped out, the rain soaking through my uniform jacket in seconds. I stepped onto the porch. My boots made a hollow thud on the wood. I reached into my pocket, my fingers finding the cold, familiar weight of my master key. I slid it into the lock. It stopped. Halfway in. A hard, metallic rejection. I jiggled it. I tried to force it. Nothing. The lock was new. Bright, polished brass that didn't belong to me. I stepped back, the rain dripping off my nose, and looked through the gap in the blinds. The living room was a hollowed-out shell. My rug was gone. My TV was gone. Instead, there were stacks of cardboard boxes, Home Depot specials, and a man I'd never seen before. He was wearing a grease-stained t-shirt, tossing my kitchen chairs into a pile like they were trash. He saw me. He walked over and shoved the window up 6 inches. "Can I help you?" he shouted over the rain. "That's my house," I said. My voice was flat, empty. The tactical brain had taken over. Threat assessment, high. Emotional response, 0. The guy looked at me like I was crazy. He leaned out, squinting through the downpour at my uniform. "Look, lady, I don't know what to tell you. I'm just the contractor. The new owners closed on this place last Tuesday. We're supposed to have the floors stripped by Friday." The word sold hit me like a physical blow to the solar plexus. I felt the air leave my lungs. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just turned around and walked back to my car. My movements were stiff, like a machine running out of oil. I climbed into the driver's seat, pulled the door shut, and hit the lock button. The click of the Subaru's locks was the only thing I had left. I picked up the phone. I dialed Lorraine. She picked up on the second ring. Her voice was light, airy, as if she were answering a call for a spa appointment. "Oh, Alice, you're back from Bar Harbor early. I was just about to call you." "The locks are changed, Mom," I said. I was staring at the front door of my house, watching the contractor haul my favorite bookshelf toward the garage. "Yes, well, things moved a lot faster than Gerald expected," she said, not a hint of shame in her tone. "We had to seize the opportunity. Denise was in a real hole, honey. You understand? Come over to Roy's for dinner tonight, around 7. I'll explain the paperwork then. It's for the best, really." She hung up. I sat there in the dark, the rain drumming a funeral beat on the roof of the Subaru. My mother hadn't just stolen my house. She'd sold my life to cover her favorite child's sins. I looked at my hands. They were steady. No tremors. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was an officer behind enemy lines. And the first rule of engagement is simple. Identify the target, then eliminate the threat. If you've ever felt the sting of a family member treating your hard work like their personal bank account, you know exactly how Alice feels right now. This is a betrayal that cuts deeper than any blade. Do you think Alice should go to that dinner, or should she call the cops immediately? Comment fight if you want to see her take them down, or legal if she should let the lawyers handle it. Don't forget to like and subscribe. The counterattack is only just beginning. I put the car in gear. I didn't head to a hotel. I headed to the one person who could help me turn this crime into a war. Dinner was at 7. I had 2 hours to prep the battlefield. Uncle Roy's house smelled like stale pine sol and overcooked pot roast. The screen door slammed behind me, a sharp metallic crack that echoed like a pistol shot in the quiet suburban evening. I didn't take off my coat. I didn't untie my boots. I just stood in the arched entryway of the dining room, my spine a steel rod, watching the vultures feed. 9 people sat around a table meant for 6. Uncle Roy, Aunt Jillian, Martha. The whole Powell clan was there, hunched over floral-patterned china. Gerald Pratt sat at the head of the table, his thick, sun-reddened neck squeezed into a lavender polo shirt. He was pouring wine like he owned the cellar, looking like a man who had just won the lottery using someone else's ticket. My mother, Lorraine, sat to his right. She didn't look up when I walked in. She just kept stabbing at a bowl of green salad, the vinegar smell sharp and sour in the stagnant air. "Sit down, Alice," Roy said, his voice muffled by a mouthful of bread. "There's a plate in the kitchen." "I'm fine standing," I said. My voice was flat, a dead calm. I swept the room, my eyes performing a tactical sweep. I noted the exits. I noted the positioning. I noted the way Gerald shifted his weight, a subtle tell of a man who knew he was sitting on a mountain of stolen goods. The room felt small, stifling. It was the typical American suburban dream turned into a crime scene, draped in lace tablecloths and the fake warmth of family loyalty. Gerald leaned back, his chair creaking under his bulk. He flashed a grin that didn't reach his eyes, oily, practiced, the look of a used car salesman closing a deal on a lemon. "Captain's back," he chuckled, the sound like gravel in a blender. "The warrior returns to the home front. We were just talking about you." "I bet you were," I said. Lorraine finally looked up. She didn't offer a hug. She didn't ask about Maine. She just set her fork down with a loud clink against the porcelain. "It's done, Alice. We didn't want to tell you over the phone, but the house is sold. The Peterson family moved in their first load of boxes today. We had to move fast. Denise was drowning. Her car was fixing to be repossessed, and her credit score is in the basement. Family has to look out for family." She said it with an air of martyrdom, as if she had personally marched into a fire to save a child. She used Denise's debt like a shield, a moral pass for grand larceny. She expected me to nod. She expected me to swallow the bitter pill of shared sacrifice that she'd been feeding me since I was old enough to hold a job. Across the table, Denise leaned back, her blonde hair perfectly coiffed. She was wearing a pair of diamond stud earrings. I recognized them. Nordstrom. 2 years ago. I'd bought them for her birthday because she'd cried about feeling invisible. Now she looked at me with a smirk that was pure venom. "I guess you're homeless now, big sister," Denise said. Her voice was like sugar poured over broken glass. "Maybe the army has a tent you can sleep in, or a ditch. You're good at living in ditches, aren't you?" Gerald let out a wet, wheezing laugh. He picked up a chicken wing and bit into it, grease glistening on his chin. The rest of the table stayed silent. Roy looked at his plate. Martha suddenly found the wallpaper very interesting. They were all in on it. A collective of silent partners in a family-run heist. They waited for me to blow up. They wanted the drama. They wanted me to scream so they could point their fingers and call me the unstable soldier who couldn't handle civilian life. I didn't give them the satisfaction. Instead, I did something that made the air in the room turn to ice. I smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the thin, sharp curve of a hunter who just watched the prey walk directly into the kill zone. I felt the steady beat of my heart, 60 beats per minute. I let the silence stretch until Gerald stopped chewing. I let it hang until Lorraine started to fidget with her napkin. "That's an interesting story, Mom," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but it cut through the room like a razor blade. "But I have one question. Just one coordinate I need to verify before I call in the strike." Gerald narrowed his eyes. "What are you talking about, Alice? It's a legal sale." Gerald handled the brokerage. "The papers are filed." I stepped closer to the table, my shadow falling over Gerald's lavender shirt. I didn't blink. "Who signed the deed, Mom? Whose name did you put on the title transfer?" Lorraine's jaw tightened. "I did. I'm your mother. I've lived in this town 60 years. The notary knows me. Everyone knows that's the Powell house." "Except it isn't," I said. I pulled my phone from my pocket. My thumb hovered over the screen. "I told you before I left. I don't keep my assets in a civilian name. That house isn't owned by Alice Powell. It's owned by an LLC registered in Delaware. A single-member entity." "You aren't on the board, Mom. You aren't an authorized signer. You didn't sell my house. You committed wire fraud and identity theft on a federal level." The smirk slid off Denise's face. Gerald's fork frozen halfway to his mouth. Lorraine's skin went a sickly shade of gray, the color of wet sidewalk. "Now," I said, my voice turning into a cold, hard hammer. "You all had your fun. You had your little dinner party on my dime. But the perimeter is breached, and I'm taking the hill back." I didn't wait for a rebuttal. I tapped the contact for Helen Marsh. I hit the speakerphone and set it right on the table next to Gerald's wine glass. The ringing sound was loud, rhythmic, like a ticking clock. "Helen Marsh here," a sharp professional voice barked through the phone. "Helen, it's Alice," I said, my eyes locked on Gerald's sweating forehead. "I'm at the target location. The suspects have confirmed the unauthorized transaction. I need the title freeze initiated and the police report for the fraudulent notary filing processed immediately. I'm standing in front of the primary actors right now. Copy that, Captain, Helen said. I'm hitting send on the injunction. Tell them to stay put. The sheriff is going to want a word about that forged signature. I picked up my phone and looked at my family. The silence wasn't just dead, it was heavy. It was the silence of people realizing they'd just stepped on a landmine in their own backyard. Dinner's over, I said. I turned and walked out. I didn't look back. I had a war to win, and I just fired the opening volley. Gerald's wheezing breath was the last thing I heard before the screen door slammed again, leaving the parasites to rot in the dark. Wednesday morning arrived with the color of a bruised sky. 8 o'clock. I was sitting in a chair that felt like a bucket of ice, staring at a set of flickering fluorescent lights in the office of Helen Marsh. The air in the room was thick with the scent of industrial carpet cleaner and the burnt, acidic tang of decaf coffee. Helen didn't do small talk. She didn't do, "How are you holding up?" She was a former JAG officer with a jawline like a hatchet and a reputation for treating legal battles like scorched earth campaigns. That was exactly why I was there. The office was a fortress of filing cabinets and stacks of manila folders that looked like small skyscrapers. Helen sat across from me, her eyes shielded by thin, silver-rimmed glasses that caught the cold light of the room. She didn't look like a savior. She looked like a technician about to dismantle a bomb. "The whole thing is garbage, Alice," Helen said. Her voice was a low rasp, steady and devoid of pity. "Total trash." She flicked a thick stack of papers across the desk. The sound of the paper sliding over the wood was like a dry cough. I didn't reach for them. I kept my hands folded in my lap, my back pressed against the hard plastic of the chair. I had spent 8 years auditing supply chains. I knew what a breach looked like. This wasn't just a breach, it was a total collapse of the perimeter. "The house is registered to North Star Holdings, LLC," Helen continued, tapping a blunt fingernail on a line of text. "It's a single-member entity. You are the only officer. You are the only person with the authority to sign a deed, a lease, or even a plumbing permit. Your mother's name isn't on a single page of the Articles of Organization. She had as much right to sell that house as I have to sell the Brooklyn Bridge." I nodded once. Short, sharp. I hadn't lost my home. The law was still on my side, even if the locks had been changed by a stranger. But I had lost something else. Every word Helen spoke was another shovelful of dirt on the grave of my relationship with Lorraine. I had to pay a stranger to protect me from the woman who gave me life. That was the real cost of the war. "Look at this," Helen said, pulling a magnifying lens from her drawer. She pushed a notarized document toward me. "This is the quitclaim deed, supposedly signed by you last Friday." I leaned in. The glass of the lens was cold against my knuckle. I looked at the signature, Alice Powell. It was a joke. I have spent my entire adult life signing manifests and duty rosters. I sign with a sharp, left-leaning slant. The letters are jagged, like concertina wire. The signature on the paper was soft, loopy. It leaned to the right, like a drunk trying to stand up straight. "I signed nothing," I said. My voice was a flat line. "That's a forgery." "Of course it is," Helen replied. She pointed to a blue stamp at the bottom of the page. "Vince Coletti. He's the notary public who verified your identity. I did some digging this morning. Guess who Vince's best friend is? Gerald Pratt. They've been drinking buddies at the VFW for 6 years. Coletti's license is already on the chopping block. He's a bottom feeder who signs whatever Gerald puts in front of him for a $50 bill and a shot of cheap whiskey." I sat back, the air in the office feeling thinner. It wasn't just my mother and my sister. They had built a small, pathetic network of criminals right in my own backyard. A drinking buddy with a notary stamp. A disgraced broker with a polyester shirt. They were playing a game of house, but the stakes were my life's work. "It gets worse," Helen said. She pulled out a sheet of yellow legal pad paper covered in her own tight, cramped handwriting. "I ran the numbers on the sale. This is where the real rot is. She pointed to the figures. The house, my house, had a fair market value of $230,000. I'd done the research before I left for Maine. It was a solid asset in a rising neighborhood. But Gerald hadn't sold it for that. He'd pushed it through a quick sale to a couple named the Petersons. The sale price? $187,000. They closed in 6 days, Helen said, a thin, grim smile touching her lips. That's unheard of in this market unless someone is greasing the wheels. Gerald charged a consulting fee instead of a commission since he lost his brokerage license 4 years ago for a similar stunt. He walked away with $23,000 in cash under the table. The rest went into an escrow account that your mother has access to. My jaw muscle twitched. I felt a surge of heat in my chest, a dark, oily anger that I had to fight to keep under control. My mother thought she was saving Denise. She thought she was being the good parent by sacrificing me. But she was just a pawn. Gerald didn't care about Denise's debt. He didn't care about my sister's car payments or her credit score. He just needed a payday. And he used my mother's blind, toxic favoritism as the lever to pry open my life. He was gutting me through her. And she was letting him do it because she wanted to be the hero in a story that was actually a tragedy. Gerald's a predator, Alice, Helen said, closing the folder with a definitive thud. He's been doing this for years. He finds women with assets and no common sense, and he bleeds them. Your mother just happened to have a daughter with a very nice house. I stood up. I straightened my jacket, my fingers lingering on the cold brass of my uniform buttons. I felt like I was back in the audit room, staring at a missing shipment of ammunition. The breach was identified. The targets were marked. If they were willing to forge a deed, I said, looking out the window at the gray Ohio streets. If they were willing to bring in a fake notary and sell a house they didn't own. Where else did they go? Helen looked at me, her expression unreadable. You mean the other assets? The radar in my brain started to ping. A fast, rhythmic warning. The safety net account. The $18,000 I'd saved for my mother's old age. The money I'd earned while sleeping in a sand-filled trench. I need to get to the bank, I said. I didn't say goodbye. I walked out of the office, the heavy door clicking shut behind me like the bolt on a rifle. My mother didn't just sell my house. She had invited a wolf into the fold, and I was starting to realize that the house was only the first course. I had to check the perimeter of my entire life before there was nothing left to defend. 7:15. The phone on the dashboard buzzed like a trapped hornet against the plastic. I didn't reach for it. Not at first. I just sat there in the driver's seat of the Subaru, watching the screen light up with my mother's name. The rain had stopped, leaving the Ohio morning damp and gray, the kind of cold that crawls under your skin and stays there. I was parked in a gravel lot near the base, the smell of stale Motel 6 coffee and industrial floor wax clinging to my uniform. I looked at my hands. They were steady. The timer in my gut was already counting down. I finally swiped the screen. I didn't say hello. I just waited. You're really going to do this, Alice? Lorraine's voice came through the speaker, sharp and trembling with that practiced fragile edge. You're going to burn this family to the ground over a pile of bricks and mortar. You have your army career. You have your pension. You can build another life. Denise has nothing. If Grandma were alive today, she would spit on you for being so cold-hearted. She was using the dead as a bludgeon. It was a classic move. Low effort, high impact. A desperate reach for the moral high ground she'd long since vacated. But I wasn't the same girl who used to cry in the kitchen while she pampered Denise. I wasn't the girl who took the blame just to keep the peace. Grandma taught me to read every line before I signed my name, I said. My voice was a flat, dry rasp, stripped of any daughterly warmth. She taught me that a person's word is their bond, and a thief is a thief, even if they share your blood. You taught Denise how to spend money she didn't earn. Don't you dare bring Grandma into this. You're a monster, she hissed, the fragility replaced by a raw, ugly venom. You'd put your own mother on the street for a house you don't even live in half the year? You're selfish, Alice. You always have been. No, I said, staring at the peeling leather on the steering wheel. I'm just the one who stopped paying for the cage. Don't call me again unless it's through my lawyer. I tapped the red icon and ended the call. I didn't feel the sting. The nerves were dead. I sat there in the silence, my mind already pivoting. In logistics, if one part of the chain is compromised, you assume the entire system is breached. My mother wasn't just a victim of Gerald's charm, she was an active participant in my dismantling. I opened my mobile banking app. My thumb hovered over the safety net account. This wasn't just a number on a screen. This was $18,000. The physical, hard-earned proof of 3 deployments. This was the hazard pay I'd banked while sleeping in sandpits in a desert that wanted me dead. This was the money I'd earned while the taste of grit was permanent in my teeth and the constant low-level hum of an IED threat lived in my marrow. Every dollar was a piece of my life I'd traded for her security. I'd built this account as a cushion for Lorraine, a way to make sure she'd never have to peddle makeup door to door just to pay for her heart meds when she got older. The app loaded. The spinning circle felt like a countdown to an impact. Then the screen refreshed. $0. The numbers were a bright, bleeding red against the white background. I didn't blink. I didn't gasp. I just looked at it. The balance was a hollowed-out shell. I tapped the transaction history. My eyes scanned the lines, hunting for the breach with the cold precision of an auditor. 3 ATM withdrawals. Maxed out. Every single day for the last week. While I was in Bar Harbor, thinking my base was secure, someone was at the drive-thru bank on High Street, gutting my life. I scrolled down to the largest transfer. A direct electronic payment. 5 figures. Recipient, G. Pratt. The air in the car suddenly felt thin. Not a cent had gone to the bank for Denise's credit card debt. Not a penny had gone to pay off her leased luxury SUV. Gerald hadn't even pretended to help my sister. He had simply used my mother's hands to reach into my pockets and hand him the cash. Lorraine hadn't just sold my house to save her favorite child. She had handed the keys to my entire survival strategy to a man who'd been X-raying my ceiling joists while he ate my food. She had used the very safety net I'd built for her to buy Gerald a new suit or a down payment on his next scam. She'd stripped off my armor and handed it to a predator. Pain is just a sensation, I whispered to the empty car. I'd heard a drill sergeant say that once during a forced march in Georgia when my boots were full of blood. Precision is a decision. I closed the app. The screen went black, reflecting my own face back at me, the face of a captain who had just realized she was no longer defending a perimeter. I was in a war of attrition now. My mother had taken my mercy and turned it into a weapon against me. Fine. An unarmored soldier is faster, harder to hit, and far more dangerous because she has nothing left to lose. I put the Subaru in gear. The engine rumbled, a low mechanical snarl that matched the pressure in my chest. I wasn't heading to Roy's. I wasn't going back to the house to plead. I was heading to the county clerk's office and then the precinct. I had the names. I had the numbers. And I was about to show them exactly what happens when you try to bleed a soldier who knows how to stitch herself back up. The counterinsurgency had officially started, and I was the only one who knew the real rules of engagement. 9 o'clock. First, federal savings. The air inside the branch was stagnant, trapped between the thick glass doors and the low hum of the old HVAC system. It smelled of ozone, toner, and that peculiar sour scent of industrial cleaner that never quite hides the dust. I stood at the teller window, my posture a rigid vertical line that did not belong in this soft, civilian space. I did not smile at the woman behind the bulletproof partition. I did not make the usual Ohio small talk about the weather or the local sports teams. I simply slid my military ID through the narrow slot. The metal was cold against my fingertips, a familiar, grounded sensation. "I need the manager," I said. My voice was a flat, low-frequency vibration. "Now." Mr. Henderson came out 3 minutes later. He was a man who looked like he had spent 30 years being slowly crushed by paperwork. His suit was a shade of gray that had gone out of style in the 90s. He ushered me into his office, a cramped box that smelled of stale coffee and old paper. "Captain Powell," he said, peering over his bifocals at my identification. Welcome home. I did not realize you were back from Bar Harbor. I am not. I am on emergency leave, I said. I leaned forward, my eyes locking onto his. I checked my accounts this morning. I did not authorize the 3 ATM withdrawals made last week. I did not authorize the wire transfer to an account held by G. Pratt. This is an official fraud claim. Henderson's fingers hit the keyboard. The click-clack of the keys started, a rhythmic, frantic sound in the small room. He stared at the screen, his brow furrowing. I watched the dust motes dancing in a sliver of light from the window blinds. I thought about that $18,000, my hazard pay. Those were nights spent in a sand-choked tent in Jordan. That was the safety net I had built to keep my mother from having to peddle makeup door to door just to pay for her heart meds. She had handed it to a vulture. We will freeze the account immediately, Henderson said, his voice dropping as he saw the transaction dates. Military orders give us the lever we need. The funds were pulled while you were on active deployment. That is a federal red flag. Consider it locked, Captain. Nobody touches a cent until the investigation is cleared. The first strand of the wire was pulled tight. I did not feel relief. I felt a cold, surgical satisfaction. 11:30. The county precinct. The lobby was a symphony of misery. Wet wool, squeaky linoleum, and the persistent buzzing of a flickering fluorescent tube overhead. I sat in a metal chair across from Detective Miller. He was a man who looked like he had seen every variety of human rot Ohio had to offer. He had a coffee stain on his tie that looked like a map of a place I never wanted to visit. I laid out the dossier Helen Marsh had prepared. I did not explain. I just pointed. The forged deed. The soft signature that leaned the wrong way. Gerald Pratt's history of consulting fees. The name of the notary, Vince Coletti. Miller flipped through the pages with a yellowed thumb. He stopped at the photocopy of the notary stamp and let out a dry puff of air. Coletti, he muttered. Regular at the VFW. He would notarize a ham sandwich if Pratt bought him a double shot of rye. He looked at the silver bars on my uniform shoulders and sighed, a heavy sound that smelled of graphite and old coffee. You sure you want to go down this road, Captain? Once I file this report for wire fraud and identity theft, the wheels start turning. It is your mother. There is no hitting the undo button once the district attorney gets this. She is not a mother today, Detective, I said. My voice was like a blade. She is a suspect. She stood in my kitchen while a stranger ripped out my sink and told me to come over for dinner. File the report. Miller did not argue. He just started typing. Click, click, click. The sound of a cage door closing. 1800. The rusty anchor. A dive bar where the air was thick with the smell of spilled lager and cheap tobacco. Ruthie was already there, her leather jacket slung over the stool next to her. She pushed a cold long neck toward me as I sat down. Accounts frozen, she growled. Locked. Police report is in the system, I said. I took a pull of the beer. It was bitter and tasted like the truth. They think they won, Ruthie. They think I am some broken soldier crying in a cheap motel. They are planning Roy's 65th birthday bash for Sunday. The whole clan will be there, champagne, cake. Ruthie lit a cigarette, the flame of the Zippo a quick flash in the dim light. You are going. I am the guest of honor, I said. I am going to let them spend the next 72 hours feeling like they pulled off the heist of the century. I want them to reach the peak before I cut the rope. I pulled my phone from my pocket. My pulse was a slow, rhythmic 60 beats per minute. I dialed the downtown bakery. I need a cake, I said when a young voice answered. 3-tier, lemon, thick, tart frosting, heavy on the citrus. Any writing on it? The girl asked. Just a name, Alice Powell, I said. And make sure the delivery driver has it at Roy Miller's place by 1400 this Sunday. Tell him it is for a farewell party. Farewell? Yeah, I said, catching my hard reflection in the bar mirror. Hard, cold, and unrecognizable. A permanent one. I hung up. The bomb was primed. The countdown had started. If you have ever had a friend like Ruthie who stood in the gap when your own blood left you for dead, drop a Ruthie in the comments right now. Like this video and subscribe to see the lemon cake explode at the party this Sunday. It is time they learned that a soldier's silence is not a weakness. It is a countdown. Are you ready for the final strike? I finished the beer and set the glass down on the wood. The sound was a sharp, final thud. Sunday could not come fast enough. It was a funeral march in the making. The parasites were about to find out what happens when you try to eat a load-bearing wall. It does not just fall, it crushes everything underneath it. Sunday afternoon in the Ohio suburbs usually smells like fresh-cut grass and cheap charcoal. But inside Uncle Roy's house, the air was stagnant, heavy with the scent of oversalted ham and the suffocating perfume of people pretending to be happy. I stood on the porch for a 3-count, listening to the muffled laughter through the screen door. It was the sound of a victory lap. They thought they had won. They thought they had successfully stripped the carcass of my life and moved on to the dessert. I didn't knock. I just pulled the door open. The screen frame gave a sharp, metallic groan that cut through the chatter like a gunshot. I walked in, my tactical boots hitting the polished hardwood with a rhythmic, heavy thud, thud, thud. I didn't take off my uniform jacket. I didn't loosen my tie. I was a foreign object in a room full of lace doilies and floral wallpaper. In my hands, I carried a large white bakery box. I walked straight into the dining room. The scene was a tableau of American suburban greed. 9 of them, squeezed around a table meant for 6. Uncle Roy was at the head, his face flushed red from an afternoon of drinking domestic light beer. Gerald Pratt sat to his right, looking like the king of a very small, very dirty hill. He was wearing a new silk tie, expensive, the kind you buy when you've just come into some unearned cash. My mother, Lorraine, was leaning against him, her hand resting on his arm with a proprietary smugness. Denise was across from them, her blonde hair perfectly curled, laughing at a joke Gerald had just finished. The room went dead silent as I reached the table. The laughter didn't fade. It broke. I set the box down in the dead center of the table, right between the mashed potatoes and the ham. The weight of it made the china rattle. "Alice," Roy said, his voice thick with confusion. "You're late. We already started the main course." "I brought the cake," I said. My voice was a flat, low-frequency hum. I didn't look at Roy. I looked at the box. I pulled the lid back, revealing 3 tiers of lemon sponge smothered in a frosting so white it looked like bone. The scent of tart, artificial citrus exploded into the room, clashing with the greasy smell of the ham. "How lovely," Lorraine said, though her voice had a jagged edge of fear. She shifted in her seat, her eyes darting toward the hallway. "But you didn't have to spend the money, honey. We're all family here." "Oh, I insisted," I said. I stood straight, my hands resting at my sides, fingers hovering near my pockets. I didn't sit. I didn't accept the plate Martha tried to hand me. Because before we cut this, I want to clarify some logistics. I think there's been a massive failure in communication regarding the family assets. Gerald leaned back, his chair creaking under his bulk. He tried for a grin, but it was oily, the look of a man who knew the floor was starting to vibrate beneath his feet. "Come on, Captain, leave the rank at the door." "The rank stays where I put it, Gerald," I said. I turned my gaze to my mother. "Mom, last Tuesday you told me you sold my house. You told this whole family that you did it to save Denise from a black hole of debt. You stood in my kitchen and watched a stranger tear out my fixtures. So, for the record, exactly what did you sell?" Lorraine's face went a sickly shade of gray. She gripped her wine glass until her knuckles turned white. "Alice, please, not now." "Now is the only time we have," I said. I leaned over the table, my shadow falling across Gerald's silk tie. "Because here's the reality. That house is owned by North Star Holdings, LLC. It is a single-member Delaware entity. My name is the only one on the articles of organization. My mother's name isn't on the deed. It isn't on the title. It isn't even on the utility bills." I pulled a folded piece of paper from my inner pocket and flicked it onto the table. It slid across the wood and stopped against Gerald's plate. "The signature you provided the notary was a forgery, Mom. And since the entity that owns the house didn't authorize the sale, the contract with the Petersons is a legal zero. It is void." As of 10 minutes ago, the sheriff has a copy of the title freeze and the fraud report. The sale didn't happen. All you did was invite a lawsuit and a felony indictment into your living room. The silence in the room was so thick you could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Roy looked at the paper, then at Gerald. Gerald didn't move. A single bead of sweat rolled down his temple. "And Gerald," I continued, my voice turning into a cold, hard hammer. "Let's talk about your consulting fee. You told my mother the market was soft. You pushed her to sell for $187 when the comps on my block are $230. You pocketed $23,000 in an under-the-table finder's fee. You took a cut from your own family to move a stolen asset. And you did it because you lost your license 4 years ago for predatory lending." "That's a lie," Denise shrieked, but her voice was thin, reeking of desperation. "Is it?" I asked. I turned to her. "The $18,000 in the safety net account. My hazard pay. The money I earned while I was getting shot at so Mom could have heart meds in her old age. Gerald didn't use it to pay your credit cards, Denise. He didn't pay off your SUV. He transferred it to a personal account in his name 3 days ago. He didn't even leave you enough for a tank of gas." Denise's mouth fell open. She turned to Gerald, her eyes wide and feral. "Gerald, you told me the debt was settled. You told me it was done." Gerald didn't look at her. He stared at his ham. "I took care of the essentials," he hissed. The table erupted. Roy roared, slamming his fist on the table. The wine glasses toppled, red liquid spreading across the white lace like a bloodstain. Denise was screaming. Gerald was trying to stand, his face a mask of panicked rage. It was a riot of parasites realizing they were trapped in a cage with no exits. Denise turned back to me, tears streaming down her face. "Alice, I didn't know. I have a child. You can't do this to me." I looked at the diamond studs in her ears. My heart felt like a piece of cold flint. "6 days ago, you called me a homeless veteran while you stood in the house I paid for," I said. My voice cut through her, screaming like a razor. "You're wearing my blood while you beg for my mercy. The sister I had died the second you let him change those locks. Don't look for her. She isn't coming back." I picked up a knife from the table. I carefully cut a thick, jagged slice of the lemon cake and pushed it toward Uncle Roy. "Happy birthday, Uncle Roy," I said. I turned on my heel. I didn't look back at the wreckage. I walked out the front door, the screen door slapping shut behind me with a final, definitive crack. I stood on the sidewalk and pulled out my phone. I had one more coordinate to verify. "Helen," I said when she picked up, "the targets are all in one location. Send to the sheriff. It's time to pick up the trash." I walked toward my Subaru. The war was over. Now, it was just time for the sentencing. The sun hadn't even thought about coming up over the Ohio horizon when the first strobe of blue and red hit the frosted windows of my mother's house. 6:15. Thursday morning. The air was a sharp, biting cold that smelled of wet asphalt and dormant earth. I was parked 3 houses down, the engine of the Subaru turned off, the cabin slowly losing its warmth. I didn't have the heater on. I wanted to feel the chill. I wanted my nerves to be as sharp as the ice forming on the puddles. 2 cruisers pulled into Lorraine's driveway, their tires crunching the gravel like a warning. 4 officers stepped out. No sirens. Just the heavy rhythmic thud of tactical boots on the porch. I watched through the windshield, my hands wrapped around a lukewarm cup of black coffee. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel regret. I felt the quiet, clinical satisfaction of a mission reaching its objective. The front door opened. The silhouette of a man appeared. Gerald Pratt, caught in his undershirt and boxers, rubbing sleep from his oily eyes. He didn't even have time to reach for a lie. One officer spun him around. The sound reached me even through the glass of my car. The metallic double click of Smith & Wesson handcuffs biting into his wrists. Gerald's knees buckled. He wasn't the king of the hill anymore. He was just a 60-year-old bottom feeder in his underwear, being shoved into the back of a squad car. The charges were etched in black and white: wire fraud, identity theft, and federal document forgery. Vince Coletti, the notary who had signed off on the theft, was already being processed across town. He'd lost his license by dawn and was facing a $6,000 fine he couldn't pay. The living room crime syndicate was officially decapitated. By noon, the legal gears were grinding the rest of them into the dirt. I sat in Helen Marsh's office, watching the Peterson family, the couple who had bought my house, sign the rescission papers. They looked gutted. They were good people, a young couple from Columbus who just wanted a yard for their dog. They'd been dragged into my mother's mud by a con man in a lavender polo shirt. I stood up and looked the husband in the eye. "I'm sorry you were caught in the crossfire," I said. My voice was a flat, steady rasp. "You'll get every cent of your earnest money back by Friday. The escrow is already frozen." I didn't wait for them to thank me. I didn't want their gratitude. I just wanted the stain of Gerald's transaction scrubbed off my property. Then came Denise. The collapse of the house sale hit her like a high-velocity round. Without my house to sell, there was no payday. No rescue. The bank didn't care about her blonde curls or her victim routine. At 1400, a flatbed tow truck backed into her driveway. I watched from the street as the operator hooked the chains to her leased luxury SUV. Denise was on the lawn, screaming, her face a blotchy mess of smeared mascara and raw panic. "You can't take it! I have a kid!" she shrieked. The same old script, the same old shield. The repo man didn't even look at her. He just cranked the winch. The SUV disappeared up the ramp, its shiny chrome wheels looking pathetic in the afternoon light. By the time the sun went down, Denise had filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy, $214,000 of debt with no load-bearing wall to hold it up. She had to pack her designer bags into cardboard boxes and move into Aunt Martha's cramped, unfinished attic. The parasite had run out of blood. The final shot came at 1900. My phone buzzed on the kitchen table. Lorraine. She'd escaped the handcuffs because the DA couldn't prove she understood the legal gravity of the forgery. But she had a permanent criminal record now. A scarlet letter for a woman who lived for her good name in a small town. I picked up. I didn't say a word. "Alice?" Her voice was a broken, wet mess. She was sobbing, the kind of heavy, ragged breathing of a woman who had finally realized the world didn't owe her a living. "Alice, honey, please, Gerald is in jail. They took Denise's car. She's sleeping on a cot at Roy's. I'm ruined. I have no money left. The bank froze everything. Please, just give me enough to get through the month. I'm your mother. You can't let me starve." I leaned against the counter of my dark, empty kitchen. I looked at the chipped ceramic mug in my hand. I thought about the $18,000 of hazard pay she'd handed to Gerald. I thought about the sand in my teeth and the nights I spent wondering if I'd ever see Ohio again. "I told you not to touch my things, Lorraine," I said. My voice was a sheet of black ice. No anger, no heat, just a final, definitive conclusion. "I didn't mean it like that. I was just trying to help your sister," she wailed. "You're so strong, Alice. You don't need the money like she does. Please, help me. I'm all alone." "You aren't alone," I said, staring at the blue and red reflection of a passing patrol car on my wall. "You have exactly what you chose. You chose Gerald. You chose the lies. And now you can choose how to survive without me. I've already contacted the base. I've removed you as my primary beneficiary. I've updated my Dears file. You aren't my next of kin anymore. You're just a person I used to know." "Alice, you can't do this. I'm your mother." "No," I said, my thumb hovering over the screen. "You were just the first person who taught me how to identify an enemy. Goodbye, Lorraine." I tapped the red icon. I didn't wait for the scream. I didn't wait for the guilt to kick in, because there was nothing left to trigger it. I opened my contacts, scrolled to her name, and hit block. I did the same for Denise. The silence that followed was heavy. It was absolute. It was the sound of a perimeter finally being secured. I sat in the dark, listening to the ticking of the clock on the wall. The parasites were gone. The wall was still standing, and for the first time in 37 years, I didn't have to carry anyone else's weight. The house felt like a hollowed-out skull. Empty. Quiet. I walked through the rooms where strangers had staged their lives for 6 days, breathing in the smell of someone else's laundry detergent and a faint, lingering scent of cheap floral perfume. The boxes were gone. The Petersons had moved their belongings out 4 hours after the rescission papers were filed. Now, it was just me, the dust motes dancing in the afternoon sun, and the heavy metallic silence of a base that had been breached and reclaimed. I didn't sit down. I didn't go to the kitchen to make a pot of coffee. Instead, I stood in the center of the living room and listened to the house breathe. It felt wounded. It felt like it was waiting for me to do something about the holes Lorraine and Gerald had punched in its side. The locksmith arrived at 1400. He was a guy named Dave, a man with grease under his fingernails and a cigarette tucked behind his ear that he didn't bother to light. He didn't ask questions. He didn't offer any suburban sympathy. He just set his heavy tool bag on the hardwood and looked at the front door. He saw the scratches around the keyhole. He saw the way the frame had been shoddily patched where a new lock had been forced in. "Someone did a hack job on this," Dave said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. "Someone tried to rewrite the ownership," I said. My voice was a flat, dry vibration. Dave nodded and got to work. He pulled an angle grinder from his bag. The machine screamed to life, a high-pitched metallic shriek that sounded like the house was finally venting its pent-up rage. Sparks showered the floor, orange and white pinpricks of fire bouncing off my boots. I watched the grinder cut through the old brass deadbolt, the one Lorraine had used to lock me out of the life I'd built with my own blood and sweat. "Just the locks?" Dave asked as he wiped a smudge of oil from the new chrome cylinder. "No," I said. I looked at the pile of mangled brass on the floor. "I'm changing a habit." He gave me a long look, the kind of look one veteran gives another when they recognize a permanent shift in the rules of engagement. He didn't say another word. He just finished the job and handed me the new keys. They were cold. They were heavy. They felt like a clean slate. Once the door was secured, I started the purge. I went through the closets first. I found a polyester sweater Denise had left behind, smelling of menthol cigarettes and desperation. I found a floral vase Lorraine had given me 3 Christmases ago, a piece of mass-produced junk she'd bought at a discount store while I was sending her money from a desert 10,000 miles away. It was filled with the dust of her fake apologies. I dragged a heavy black trash bag through the house. I didn't sift through the memories. I didn't pause over the photos. If it was a gift from them, it was a hook. If it was a reminder of their family loyalty, it was a chain. I walked out to the curb and dumped the bag into the bin. I dropped the floral vase on top of it. The glass shattered with a sharp, satisfying clink that echoed down the quiet street. Next, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop. I pulled up my credit reports, Experian, Equifax, TransUnion. I hit the freeze button on all of them. I set up identity theft alerts that would trigger a siren in my inbox if so much as a penny moved without my thumbprint. I changed every password, every security question. I removed Lorraine from my Dears file at the base. I revoked her status as my primary beneficiary. To the United States Army and the global financial system, Lorraine and Denise Powell no longer existed in my orbit. The sun was starting to dip below the tree line when the doorbell rang. I didn't flinch. I checked the perimeter camera. Ruthie was standing there, her leather jacket slung over one shoulder. She had 2 greasy cardboard boxes of pepperoni pizza and a 6-pack of cold long necks in a plastic ring. "Place looks like a morgue," she said, kicking the door shut with the heel of her boot. "It's a clean room," I replied. We sat on the bare hardwood floor of the living room, the pizza boxes between us. We didn't use plates. We didn't use napkins. We just ate the greasy, salty slices and drank the cold beer in the fading light. We didn't talk about Gerald's arraignment. We didn't talk about the jailhouse calls I'd been ignoring for 48 hours. We talked about the mountain warfare training coming up in November and the way the air in Maine smells right before the first snow. Ruthie wasn't blood. She wasn't a Powell. But she was the only person who had stood in the gap when the line broke. I looked at her, and I realized a hard truth. Family isn't something you're born into. It's something you earn through loyalty. It's the person who brings you pizza when your life is a crime scene. Late that night, after Ruthie had gone, I found the tin box. It was tucked in the very back of the pantry, hidden behind a stack of canned soup I hadn't touched in a year. My grandmother's recipe box. I pulled it out and ran my fingers over the chipped, painted metal. I flipped through the handwritten cards. Chicken dumplings, pot roast, apple butter. I stopped at the apple butter card. It was yellowed with age, the edges curled and stained with cinnamon. I noticed a small piece of tape on the back. A yellowed post-it note was folded and tucked behind the card. I unfolded it. The handwriting was a chiseled, sharp script in faded blue ink. Grandma's hand. Alice, don't let them make you the floor they walk on just because they refuse to stand up. You were built to be the wall. Let them fall. I stared at the ink until the words blurred. She had seen it. Years ago, she had seen the rot in her own daughter and the entitlement in her granddaughter. She had left me a map out of the woods before I even knew I was lost. I folded the note and put it in my pocket. I stood up and walked to the front door, checking the new lock one last time. The house was quiet, but it wasn't empty anymore. It was a fortress. My phone buzzed on the counter. A restricted number. I knew the rhythm of the ring. Lorraine. I didn't answer. I didn't even look at the screen. I just watched the light fade to black. The habit was broken. The wall was up. And the next time they tried to climb it, they'd find it wasn't made of wood anymore. It was made of stone. The paper felt like old, dry skin between my fingers. Thin, brittle. The blue ink had faded over the years, but the script was still sharp, cutting through the yellowed post-it note like a tactical order from a ghost. I sat at my kitchen table, the only light coming from the single bulb over the stove. Outside, the Ohio wind was starting to pick up, rattling the dead leaves against the vinyl siding with a persistent, scratching sound. It was the kind of silence that usually invites ghosts, but tonight the house felt clean. The parasites were gone. You are allowed to keep what you have built, I whispered. My own voice sounded like gravel under a heavy boot in the empty room. Even from those you love. I read it again. Then a third time. Grandma had known. She had spent decades watching Lorraine turn her own weakness into a high-caliber weapon, using her supposed fragility to guilt-trip everyone within a 10-mile radius. Grandma had seen the entitlement taking root in Denise, the same rot that eventually led to a forged deed and a drained bank account. She hadn't left me money or jewelry when she passed. She had left me something far more valuable, a decree of absolution. She had given me permission to survive. For 30 years, I had been the load-bearing wall for a family of termites. I had carried the weight of the guilt Lorraine shoved into my pack every time I didn't hand over a paycheck, or every time I chose my career over her manufactured emergencies. I'd been told I was the cold one, the hard one, the sister who didn't care about family values. I looked at the note. The ink was a pale blue, but the message was a steel rod. The weight finally slid off. It wasn't a sudden explosion of emotion. It was just a quiet, heavy release, like a 60-pound rucksack being unbuckled after a 20-mile march through mud. I didn't owe Lorraine a seat at my table anymore. I didn't owe Denise a single cent of my hazard pay. I had fulfilled my duty as a daughter the moment Lorraine sold me out to a man like Gerald Pratt. She had dug her own trench with her own hands. I wasn't going to crawl in and die with her just to prove I was loyal. 5 o'clock. The alarm didn't need to ring. My internal clock was already ticking. I stood up from the bed, the sheets crisp and tight, the way they should be. I moved through the dark house with the steady, practiced muscle memory of a soldier preparing for a deployment. No wasted movement, no hesitation. I went to the kitchen. I didn't turn on the radio to hear the morning chatter. I didn't check the news. I just ground the beans and watched the black coffee drip into my old, chipped ceramic mug, the one with the faded unit insignia on the side. It was bitter, hot. It burned to the back of my throat, but it grounded me in the present. I stood by the window, watching the first gray light of the morning bleed into the horizon. I dressed in the silence of my fortress. The sliding of the zipper on my uniform jacket was a sharp, final sound that signaled the end of my leave. I reached for my dog tags on the dresser. They were cold against my chest, a familiar weight that reminded me of who I actually belonged to. I belonged to the mission. I belonged to the code. I belonged to myself. I did one last sweep of the house. It was empty. The furniture I'd kept was minimal, functional, and clean. The air was cool and smelled of nothing but pine cleaner and the fading scent of wood smoke from a neighbor's chimney. It wasn't just a building anymore. It was a phalanx. It was a gray, quiet space where no one had the right to demand a single brick from the walls I had built with my own life. I grabbed my keys from the counter. I walked out the front door and locked it. The new chrome cylinder turned with a smooth, solid thunk. Secure. My Subaru Outback sat in the driveway, its dark blue paint dusted with the first frost of the season. I walked around to the passenger side and ran my thumb over the long, jagged scratch on the door panel. A souvenir from a gravel road in Maine. It was a scar. It wasn't pretty, and I hadn't bothered to fix it, but it was mine. It was a reminder that you can take a hit and keep moving. I climbed into the driver's seat. The engine turned over on the first try, a deep mechanical growl that vibrated through the floorboards and up into my spine. I sat there for a minute, watching the exhaust plume rise in the rearview mirror like a white signal fire. Ohio was waking up. I could see the dim yellow lights of the neighbor's kitchen flicking on across the street. Somewhere across town, Lorraine was probably waking up in Aunt Martha's spare room, realizing her bank account was still a hollow zero. Denise was probably staring at a pile of bankruptcy papers, wondering why the world had stopped catering to her whims the second I stopped paying the bill. I didn't hate them. Hate takes too much energy, and I had a long drive ahead of me. I just didn't recognize them anymore. They were shadows in a rearview mirror. I shifted the car into gear. I didn't look at the house as I backed out. I didn't look at the empty spot where the for sale sign had once stood as a monument to my mother's betrayal. I just pointed the nose of the Subaru toward the highway. The fog was thick, a gray blanket draped over the rolling hills of the Midwest. I drove into it, the headlights cutting two clean, sharp tunnels through the mist. A soldier can bleed for a country. A soldier can hold a line against an invading force. But a soldier should never hand the keys to her life to someone who carries the heart of an enemy. I was the only one in the chain of command now. The road ahead was open. The silence in the car wasn't lonely. It was absolute. It was the sound of a woman who had finally stopped being the floor for others to walk on. I hit the accelerator. The fog swallowed the car, and for the first time in 37 years, I was breathing air that didn't belong to anyone else. I was the commander of the dawn.